If you've watched my channel before, you may know that I'm about to pick up a new caravan, pack the vehicle and drive around Australia with my family. The details of the van will be released on the channel very soon, but in today's episode, it's all about the Landcruiser 200 series. So I picked up my stock Toyota Landcruiser a little while ago now, and since then I've made some changes. In today's video, I'm going to cover all the accessories and the modifications and the way in which I've set up my Landcruiser for touring Australia. So it wasn't until I started writing notes for this episode I realised just how much I've done to this cruiser. I've done many videos on specific products and topics in relation to the cruiser in much more detail, so I'll be sure to link them in the description below. I've also used a huge range of products from a variety of suppliers, and I'll put some of the more popular products in the description below as well. As always, I've created a timestamp down below, so if you're interested in a very particular topic or segment of this review, check that out. Otherwise, let's get straight into it. This is my 2014 Toyota Landcruiser 200 Series Sahara. It houses a 4.5 litre V8 twin-turbo diesel engine pushing out 195 kilowatts and 615 newton meters of torque from factory. Being the Sahara spec, we get a few luxuries including heated and cooled seats, rear entertainment, electric tailgate and center console fridge. Ignoring the interior niceties, more importantly the Sahara spec also includes multi-terrain monitoring using 4 cameras around the vehicle when off-roading, KDSS hydraulic suspension assist, improving suspension on and off-road depending on the conditions, and multi-terrain select, allowing us to adjust the traction control intervention depending on the terrain with a flick of a switch. So there isn't much on my Landcruiser that has remained stock, so let's work front to back, inside and out, and I'll show you around. So up front here we have the ARB Steel Deluxe Bull Bar, a fairly common and standard modification, particularly here in Australia with the risk of animal strikes. Initially I wanted something a little bit more aggressive without these hoops, but I decided in the end that the protection these upper hoops provide are definitely going to come in handy for the more long and remote touring aspect. Within this bar I've mounted a carbon 12,000 pound winch. This winch was chosen due to its lightweight, coming in at about 21 kilos and value for money. Costing around $1,100, it represents great value and has pulled the Landcruiser out of sticky situations a few times. I must admit the maintenance schedule is lagging a little bit for this winch, however it's still pulling hard. Up underneath the bull bar, next to these bash plates here, I have dual ARB recovery points. These are constructed from a single piece of high-grade steel, specific to the Landcruiser 200 series, and the slots allow for direct use with bow shackles and winch hooks and still allow for the full movement on the front wheels. My only complaint is the sharp edges, which means they're not suitable for soft shackles, but overall they've been used many times without issue. Now we'll move on to the lighting and electrical a bit later on, so let's move down the side. So not a whole lot going on the side of the vehicle here. We're not running any scrub bars or any aftermarket steel side steps, and primarily to keep the weight down. I have damaged these factory alloy side steps on a couple of occasions, but they seem to straighten out okay. I just drive knowing the lack of protection on these factory seals here and try and avoid obstacles that may cause damage. Moving on to the rear of the vehicle, and I've moved that spare wheel out from underneath onto a Kmart single wheel swing away carrier. This vehicle specific carrier uses the slot where the rear reflector was once mounted, and with a small hole cut in the rear bumper, mounts to the factory tow bar with some heavy duty brackets. Again, in trying to keep the weight down, I didn't want or need a full steel bar on the back of the Landcruiser. Although Kmart do offer the same option for the passenger side of the vehicle, this here suits my needs perfectly. Not only has this given me the ability to move the tyre out of the way from potential damage with the larger tyres hanging down, but I've also used it to hang a crash pad wheel bag on the rear here, which comes in super handy from storing anything from firewood, dirty recovery gear, or most commonly rubbish bags. So moving the spare wheel out from underneath the vehicle here has enabled me to use the huge amount of space remaining, and I've gone ahead and mounted a steel aftermarket fuel tank made by the Long Ranger. This replaces the small 45 litre sub-tank that was mounted above the spare wheel and replaces it with a tank with the capacity of 122 litres of diesel. This gives the Landcruiser a total of 215 litres of diesel, which has been awesome for long remote trips or just avoiding those remote and expensive fuel stops. In addition to the 122 litres of diesel, this tank also houses a 55 litre stainless steel water tank and has been invaluable to storing and accessing fresh water easily. Now I've plumbed that stainless steel water tank from underneath the vehicle into a 12 volt water pump within the rear storage area of the Landcruiser. This is then plumbed out to a brass tap that sits on the far end of that tyre swing away. I flick a switch on the rear draw system, turn on the tap, and I have access to 11 litres per minute and the ability to connect regular fittings for directional and pressure options. I can monitor the tank's water level with a gauge mounted in the custom side storage, and we'll get onto that a little later. So I haven't gone and put any more protection plates or bash plates underneath the Landcruiser. It seems to be fairly well protected under there, and I just don't think I need them for the type of forward driving and touring that I do. In addition to that, I save on the weight and the ongoing maintenance costs having to remove them for regular servicing. They may have been helpful, but so far I'm managing just fine without them. So looking up, and I fitted the Rhino Rack Pioneer platform roof rack. This Pioneer flat tray is full length at 2.128 metres long and 1.236 metres wide. There is a wider option out there for the 200 series, but I think this best suits the vehicle aesthetics. I mounted this to the vehicle with a Rhino Rack backbone mounting system. That's this long steel mount along the side and connects to the rack on multiple cross members and at 3 points on each side of the vehicle, providing a super strong mount. So the total rated weight that is permissible on this roof rack is 113 kilos as we see it today, which is fairly significant. Now up here we have a few basic items that are going to come in very handy as we travel around Australia. On the passenger side we have the 270 degree 30-second awning. This is a super handy and convenient wraparound awning that is secured to the roof using these super strong and adjustable K-on brackets. On the driver's side of the rack I mounted this low profile storage box bolted directly to the rack. With internal gas struts and the ability to be locked, it is easy to use and can be secured safely. Generally, I use this to carry my stand-up paddleboard and a couple of walls for that awning. In between the storage box and the awning is that Renogy 100 watt traditional glass solar panel. I've been through quite a few solar panels on this roof rack in the past, but this one fits that space nicely and will keep the batteries topped up in between short drives. At the front of the rack, I've mounted 4 MaxTrax across the front of the roof rack using the MaxTrax mounting pins secured to these flat K-on brackets. They sit flush along the roof rack and can also be locked and secured to the roof. I've mounted 4 adjustable eyelets in front of the MaxTrax, giving me the ability to secure any further items along the way. I do have a shovel rack that's currently on order, which will fit to the driver's side of the roof rack, providing us with a quick and easy yet lockable solution. Now I also have some lighting mounted to this roof rack as well, but we'll get onto that in the electrical section. So coming back down, and I'll run through the suspension setup. I am running a 2-inch lifted ARB OME BP51 remote reservoir suspension system on the Landcruiser that is also certified with the GVM upgrade. This package comes from ARB with the GVM certification, so once installed, it's a matter of quickly getting it inspected, and I've managed to increase the GVM on this vehicle from 3,350 kilos to 3,845. Now the rear springs on the Landcruiser were initially rated to a 400 kilo constant load. However, after my last weigh-in and figuring out how heavy this cruiser is, I've upgraded them to a 600 kilo constant. In addition to that, I've also fitted airbag helpers from Airbag Man. These allow me to stiffen or soften the spring rates using some valves on the back or the automatic inflation kit. I can inflate and deflate these from manual valves at the rear of the vehicle. However, I've also plumbed them up to the onboard air compressor and inflation kit to do this much easier through a set of paddle switches and digital display in the rear draw system. Having the ability to very quickly and easily increase and decrease the pressure in those airbags in the rear of the vehicle will come in super handy as we continue to unhitch and hitch up our caravan as we travel Australia. As we installed the 2-inch lift, I also installed some suspension supporting modifications. This included a set of Blackhawk UCAs or upper control arms in the front to correct the caster angles, a front differential drop to reduce the CV shaft angles, and a rear adjustable panhard rod to correct the rear axle alignment. All in all, the suspension on the Cruiser has been awesome. I did have some initial dramas with some of the fitters fitting the components, just not having a great knowledge of the components they were fitting, and these two rear shocks have been replaced with some leaks, but overall they have performed very, very well. The BP51 remote reservoir shocks are also fully adjustable in both their compression and their rebound. Now initially I didn't think I would use this very often, but after playing around with some of the settings, it's a great way to fine tune the setup and the weight of the vehicle, and really does make a big difference. So moving on to wheels and tyres. Now this Sahara spec comes with stock 18-inch alloys, and with the larger brake caliper size on the front of the vehicles in both the Sahara spec and the VX spec, it can be difficult to fit 17-inch rims. It is possible, but due to the lack of clearance between the brake caliper and the potential of dirt and debris, rocks getting stuck there, I just remained with the 18-inch. This being said, I chose an 18 by 9-inch wheel, 1 inch wider than stock. These Method NV305 matte black wheels are also positive 25mm offset, pushing the wheels a little further out towards the guards, while also retaining the weight ratings suitable for my GBM upgrade. I wrapped the Methods with a 305 65 18 BF Goodrich ATK03, which comes in at about 33.6 inch. This is probably the largest size I can go without more modifications, and still clears the factory KDSS suspension system. Now I did have to cut this front guard just a little bit and remove those front mud flaps to make these wheels fit, but I still maintain that they're the best size tyre for my setup. Now although I do love these tyres, the one negative is that they are quite a hard size to find, particularly in remote locations. This may be an issue for us as we travel around Australia, as we only carry one spare, but we'll deal with this if required. Moving up the front to the power plant of the Landcruiser, this is where we find our 1 VDJ 4.5 litre V8 twin turbo diesel. This engine from factory is awesome, has plenty of power and torque, but it hasn't stopped me from making a few alterations. On the intake, I've installed a Safari RMAX snorkel on the driver's side of the vehicle. This large 4-inch intake is pre-filtered with a Donaldson cyclonic filter to remove bugs, leaves and larger debris particles. This flows on into a standard Landcruiser 200 series airbox, where I've replaced the paper filter with an oiled uni-filter element, and this seems to be the best solution for my vehicle through some of the testing I've done. Now this being said, I do have plans to change this very soon, but I'll provide an update in due course. Now the engine components, including the intercooler and the cooling system, have remained stock, but I have had the engine's ECU tuned. Reaper Performance Diesel in Perth have dyno tuned this vehicle to pull a few more kilowatts and newton meters of torque from the engine given the current setup. This has made a huge difference to the vehicle, bringing the power up from 190 horsepower to 245 horsepower at the wheels, and the torque from 507 newton meters to 642 newton meters, while still retaining factory air-fuel ratios. Now in addition to the engine's ECU tune, I've also had the gearbox tuned as well. And this has made a few alterations, including the shift points, the torque tolerances, and the line pressures within the gearbox. I have a bit more information in a more in-depth video. However, it holds gears longer, shifts at points that take into account the vehicle's setup, including the larger tyres, and shifts quicker. This, in conjunction with the StockLock Extreme Torque Converter lockup kit, has made a huge difference to the way in which the engine and the driveline behave and handle. It's increased the performance a lot, and something I'd highly recommend. What it also has done is made sure our transmission temps don't overheat, an issue that I used to struggle with when towing our previous van. On the exhaust side, I fitted a Manta aluminized steel twin 3-inch into single 4-inch exhaust system containing high flow cats and a center single muffler. Yes, it is noticeably louder inside the vehicle, but it's not overly offensive, and both Tegan and I are happy with the result. Now with all the extra power and the additional weight on the Cruiser, I've also set out to improve the performance of the brakes. I've replaced the rotors and pads front and rear with DBA T3 4000 series slotted rotors and DBA Extreme Performance pads. Although leaving the factory brake lines installed, this has still made a significant difference to the braking feel and stopping distance, particularly as I'm carrying a heavy load. Electrical? Well, there's a lot going on in this Landcruiser 200 series, so let's start up the front at the power source. I'm currently running twin lithium underbonnet batteries in the engine bay. The starter battery is an iTech World 1420 CA Pro. Now I've done a dedicated video on this battery, testing voltage drops, capacities, and even freezing the battery, and so far it's performing well. I run an auxiliary battery up here as well, and that is the iTech World 120X. The auxiliary battery is managed and charged by a Redarc BCDC 1240D charger, which is located in the front of the vehicle behind the plastic grille. The Redarc realistically only charges at a maximum of about 35 amp, but I've also created two solar inputs on this vehicle. The first is mounted up there on the roof, and that's connected to that 100 watt solar panel, and the second is down here in the engine bay. This allows me to connect multiple solar panels to the vehicle and provide up to 40 amp of charge while the engine is off. The Redarc charger also has a solar priority mode, which means that while I'm driving down the highway, if I'm bringing in 7 amp from that roof mounted solar panel, then that's 7 amp that it's not going to be seeking from the vehicle's alternator. The majority of the electrical system is managed from an aftermarket fuse block mounted in the engine bay, and this houses most of the fuses for our accessories. Now there's a few accessories in the cab of the vehicle, but the vast majority of the electrical system is down the back. On the passenger side of the drawer system, I have a Victron BMV712 battery monitor that measures the current coming in and out of the batteries, giving me good indications of the battery's level and health. This is required in my setup as it's almost impossible to tell the state of charge of a lithium battery by the voltage alone. The Victron unit is also Bluetooth enabled, so I can read a lot of data from this unit around camp or have it set up while I'm driving to make sure the charging rates are correct. Moving down, I have a couple of switches for lighting, which we'll get onto in a moment, and then 4 USB outlets and 2 12-volt cigarette-styled outlets. The fridge in the rear is powered from a 12-volt screw-in adapter mounted to the fridge slide and managed by a cable chain, and behind that we have a 1000-watt 240-volt inverter. On the driver's side of the drawer system, I have a digital display for the rear suspension airbags as mentioned before, the 2 paddle switches to control those airbags, and 2 rocker switches. The left switch controls the 12-volt water pump mounted in the wing kit here, and on the right, the onboard air compressor. I have a standard ARB air fitting outlet to access the compressed air from my ARB 12-volt twin-cylinder air compressor plumbed into a 4-litre air tank, and this is all mounted within the vehicle's plastics to the side, tucked away out of sight. Moving around to the EMU wing storage area on the driver's side, and this houses a Topogy water tank monitor, the control panel for our 1000-watt inverter, and 2 240-volt GPO outlets. As I've used a pass-through extension cable for the 240-volt outlet, I can also access a 4-port power board from the rear seat, also powered from that same 1000-watt inverter. We also have a switch for the internal light, and a switch to charge 2 LED Lenser P7 torches. Now inside the cab here, I do have a secondary dual battery monitor, just monitoring the voltages of those 2 under-bonnet batteries. Now, although it is better suited to my previous AGM setup, it is also great for being on the road and making sure that those batteries are receiving charge. For communication in the vehicle, I've mounted twin GME XRS UHF units, the one on the passenger side being the 370C and the one on the driver's side being the newer 390C. I've mounted these directly to the factory plastics, and although not overly happy with the result of the driver's side, they are still practical, out of the way, and very easy to access. I generally run one of them on channel 40 and the other on a convoy channel or on scan. Up the front of the vehicle, I have twin antennas, of which I have both the 2.1 and 6.6 decibel options. I generally run the 2.1 decibel around town given their height, and then swap these out for the 6.6 decibels for touring trips. Although the shorter 2.1 decibel might be better for longer distance over flat terrain, I find the distance negligible and I prefer the 6.6 for overall performance. Inside the cab, I also have the dual Blackview 750X dash cameras front and rear. These record 1080p while driving and time-lapse while parked, along with motion and impact detection modes. Probably more for insurance purposes than anything else. I run the Redarc Topo braking system, which I've had mounted to the last 4 of my 4-wheel drives and never had any problems. Moving on to lighting, of which there is plenty of options on this Landcruiser, but starting up the front up here, and we've replaced the factory high beam halogen bulbs and replaced them with a steady LED kit. Super easy plug and play installation, and the high beams are much whiter and lighter than previous halogen bulbs. The standard driving lights are HIDs and work well in standard form. Now on the bull bar, I've mounted the Steady Type X Pro spotlights. These have been awesome driving lights, and I really couldn't ask for anything much brighter. More importantly than the lights themselves, the mounts are super solid, which in my experience is normally the first thing to let spotlights down. The number of bolts and the thickness of the brackets holding those spotlights down have held up to some pretty rough tracks so far, and I am fairly confident they're going to last our trip around Australia. Now moving down into the bull bar, I've replaced the fog lights with the ARB LED fog light kit, which I've been using for some time now, and to be honest, I wouldn't recommend. They produce a very average light output. However, the only positive is at least the white light matches the rest of the combination. Now moving down the side of the vehicle, I have two types of lighting options. My camp lights are the Lightforce Rock 9 side roof mount lights. Again, not a product I would recommend as they are clearly not waterproof and causing shorts within the circuit. These lights are controlled by a pair of switches on the rear draw system, and their placement and reasonable light output are great for camping applications. Now in between a pair of those Lightforce Rock 9 lights, I have a single 26-inch steady light bar. These put out some serious light and use a good amount of power to match, but they are the perfect solution to trying to find a camp at night. I specifically switched these lights from the cab so that they can be turned on and off while driving. Great driving lights, however they are way too bright for a camping application. Now underneath the vehicle I'm also running the steady RGB rock lights, one in each wheel arch and one in front of each front tyre. This is not only great for night driving, particularly technical driving, but they are also great for low light ambient camp lights so you can see around your vehicle. In the rear of the vehicle, I fitted a small LED light that plugs directly into the tailgate switch power and lights up the rear of the vehicle, the fridge and the table setup very well. Using very little power and being connected to that factory switch means that it can turn on and off automatically when the tailgate is closed, but it also comes with a button to turn on and off manually. Now jumping into the driver's seat of the cab, and I've set up a few aftermarket accessories here to provide some useful information while you're on the road. Down by the driver's right knee, and I've replaced the factory plastic surround with this alternative that includes room for additional 4 switches. Here I have retained some of the factory switches as well as mounting the Red Arc Tow Pro dial, the basic dual battery monitor and switches for my rock lights and spotlights. By the driver's left knee, I've retained the tailgate opening switch, mounted the battery link function, stock lock extreme control and twin switch for those roof mounted light bars. Now moving up onto the dash itself, I have an Ultra Gauge MX 1.4 mounted at the base of the A-pillar. This is an awesome piece of gear, definitely something I recommend and something I wouldn't go without in a vehicle moving forward. This provides me with so much useful information in regards to the engine's and vehicle's performance live while on the road, and can give me the heads up if something is going wrong or if I need to alter my driving style based on loads and temperatures. It really is like having a window into your engine. Now next to that I have a RAM mount with an X-grip fitted just to hold the mobile phone, and on top of the dash I'm testing out a new Oricon product to measure and monitor all of the tyre pressures in our combination. This new TPMS 10 has the ability to monitor up to 10 tyres at once, and I'm using it to measure the Landcruiser and the tandem axle trailer we'll be pulling. Moving across and into the centre console, and I have the Garmin Overlander GPS unit. This has what I think has to be one of the best mounts in the market for a GPS unit. The base is magnetic and centers and holds that unit very securely. Not only that, but it also charges the unit, so the cables can be run discreetly and we don't have to worry about plugging it in every time we want to use it. When you want to place it out of sight, pull it off, tuck it away, and that's it. Moving down on the center console, and I've already gone over the GME UHF units, but one of the modifications I've made here is I've removed the factory ashtray and fabricating a bracket to house twin exhaust gas temperature gauges, or EGTs. This helps me keep an eye on how hard the engine is working and lets me know whether I need to back off to retain safe temperatures. Now down in the passenger footwell I have a permanently mounted fire extinguisher mounted to a Cap Industries bracket that bolts into the factory seat mounts. A quick flick of that bracket and this can be accessed in seconds in case of an emergency. I have WeatherTech 3D molded floor mats back and front in this vehicle, and they have taken a pounding while holding up extremely well and retaining perfect carpets underneath. Now there's not a whole lot going on in the rear of this vehicle. My kids are still at an age where they need these big car seats and they do take up quite a bit of room. But I always do carry a recovery kit in the center of the rear footwell just in case we're solo touring, and it's got all the equipment I need to winch myself out in the event I can't get access to the rear of the vehicle. In addition to that, we also have these protectors on the back of the seat so the kids don't destroy the leather on the front seats, and we retain these snap shades on the windows. Just provide a little bit of extra UV protection, a bit more privacy in the rear seats. And finally, we move on to the rear storage area of the Landcruiser, and the focus here being placed on the drawer and fridge slide out system. The feature in this area has been the drawer system built by Custom Installations in Perth. These have been an awesome addition to the Cruiser, one of the first things I ordered for the vehicle, and have stood up to the test of time. I specifically chose the Waco CFX65 due to the narrower footprint, and this gave a little more room for the passenger side drawer. The fridge box surround is easily removed with 4 clips if required, and a flat replacement panel can be inserted for a variety of options. I recently designed and built my own surround unit that included a top-mounted drawer, cutlery drawers, and a slide out to house 2 induction cooktops. However, I have gone back to the setup for our trip. This wasn't because that system didn't work well. In fact, it worked very well for vehicle camping, but since we're towing a van on our big lap, this system here better suits our needs. On top of this fridge surround, I've mounted this anchor track, which holds my water pump box and this Front Runner Pro box. This box contains basic cooking gear for those day trips without the van. The 12-volt fridge is obviously on a slide, however, there is another internal slide that exposes a table which comes in very handy for roadside stops or basic camp cooking. Under the left wing kit, I have disposables and spares, things like belts, hoses, oils, fluids, fencing wire, duct tape, the vehicle jack and plate, etc. Things that we hopefully don't need on a regular basis. So in the main drawer here, we have a water bra tucked down the back. In front of that, we have my tool roll and some spares. We have a universal collapsible bucket on top. And then inside this crash bag here, we have some smaller gear, things like cable ties, sunscreen, some pegs. We've got the air hose kit, some compact towels, some electrical gear, a compact shovel, some tie down straps, the snatch strap down the side here, some additional lighting. We also have some more lighting with the work lights at the front, some additional screw-in ground pegs, and some miscellaneous items. Under the right-hand wing kit is the electrical equipment, and is generally not used for storage. This includes a 12-volt water pump, a fuse block, and associated hardware. I've also utilised the space within this factory tailgate, which is normally where the factory toolkit is kept, but since I carry my own tools and I don't need all the additional hardware to get the spare wheel out from underneath the vehicle anymore, I went out and purchased some foam for tools that are more commonly used in the 200 series. The left side containing mainly air inflation or deflation tools, and the right common metric tools for the Landcruiser 200, including 8, 10, 12 and 14mm sockets, ratchets and 5mm Allen keys for the roof rack accessories. Ever since I had this storage system installed, the right hand side down past this fridge box was always a wasted space. You could never effectively get any gear down there, or even if you did, retrieve it very easily. So what I did is I went out to design and build my own box that faced the rear quarter panel window. I've then gone out and had an Emu Wing gull wing system installed, replacing that quarter panel window with this piece of material here that opens up and allows access into the vehicle. Now, I do have a full review and I'm not overly happy with how the installation went of this particular accessory, but it does nevertheless provide awesome access into the rear of the vehicle. As mentioned earlier, it houses a small control panel on the left-hand side and torch mounts with built-in chargers on the right. The light in here makes it much easier to see and use at night, and the bottom houses a false floor. Removing this and we get access to more tools and accessories, things like an additional fuel filter, cleaners, tyre repair kit, clamps, gloves, wheel studs and the like. So there we have it. That's a lot of information crammed into just one episode, but my 2014 Toyota Landcruiser 200 series. Now, I know this setup and these types of modifications are not going to be for everybody, but it suits me, my family, and the style of traveling that we have created just perfectly. Now, I hope this video has been interesting and given you some ideas for your touring setup. Just remember, I have linked a lot of the products I used in that description below, along with some of my other videos which cover many of these topics in much more detail. If you do have any questions, feel free to reach out on our social platforms at Exploring Oz. I'd be more than happy to try and help. But again, thank you guys for watching, and we'll see you in the next episode. Cheers.